Type 3. Now, this is an interesting one. Type 3 is Cori disease, and Cori has been involved in actually glycogen storage disease type 1 as well. They were heavily involved in that. It's known as Cori disease, and this is really an interesting disease that's called limit dextrinosis, also known as Forbes. Forbes disease, limit dextrinosis. We talked about limit dextrin, so just given that, you might have kind of a clue what the problem is. It occurs in about 1 out of 100,000 live births. And it's also autosomal recessive. It's an autosomal recessive disease. There are multiple types. There's type 3A. 3A. 3B, and there's also a 3C and a 3D, but they're very rare and not well described, and we're not going to worry about them. The type depends on where the enzyme deficiency is. Well, limit dextrinosis is really a deficiency of the debranching enzyme. So you're having a problem with debranching. So it's the debranching enzyme deficiency. I.e. the name, limit dextrinosis, because what is going to happen as you start degrading your glycogen and you don't have the glucan transferase and the debranching enzyme, you're going to end up with these highly branched glycogens because you couldn't get rid of that branch. They're going to have little short branch chains on them, and they're going to be highly branched. So now you have abnormal glycogen, smaller than normal and very, very highly branched. If it's in muscle and liver, if you're missing the debranching enzyme in muscle and liver, it's known as type A. And if you're missing the enzyme only in the liver, it's type D. And this is a little rare. About 15% total are liver only. And as I say, C and D are very rare. We're not going to talk about them. This is going to look, if you look at your patient, this is going to look like glycogen storage disease type 1. The person's going to have a difficult time maintaining blood glucose. They're going to have a difficult time breaking down that glycogen, number 1. So it's going to present like glycogen storage disease type 1. There's going to be some swelling of the liver, so that has some hepatinalia. And it's going to be as a result of that odd structure of the glycogen. And there's going to be an increased amount of it. There's muscular weakness, and what you will see is an accumulation of this highly branched glycogen with this very abnormal structure if you do a biopsy, both either liver and muscle. And the way you separate these two is actually by doing both a liver and a muscle biopsy and looking at the glycogen, so seeing if you have abnormal in both or only if it's done to the liver. That was the difference between 3 and 4. You're going to see decrease in blood glucose, an increase in circulating lipids, and an increase in circulating cholesterol. This one's kind of different from type 1. And if you go back and look at type 1 notes, I said, well, you're going to see an increase in uric acid and an increase in lactate. You don't tend to see the increase in uric acid. We don't have the gout problem with this one. And you don't tend to see the increase in lactate with this one. So those tend to be normal. Treatment, same that you do for glycogen storage disease type 1. Frequent meals. This is, unlike glycogen storage disease type 1, they've been playing with using a high-protein diet on this to stimulate gluconeogenesis and limit glycogen metabolism, and that seems to be helpful in certain cases, that a high-protein diet seems to be useful. In any event, frequent meals, the idea of stimulating gluconeogenesis seems to work here. It's interesting that it doesn't work so well with glycogen storage disease type 1. But here it does. One of the problems over the long term in this case is going to be cirrhosis, because that abnormal glycogen in the liver is going to cause liver scarring. That liver scarring is going to turn into cirrhosis. You start with fibrosis, go to cirrhosis, and ultimately have liver failure. So that's an issue with these individuals.
A good question.
Yep.
Assuming that this individual is sedentary, how long do they sustain activity if they're working out?
They're not as bad as some were about to say. They have muscle weakness, but they can apply themselves with they're not going to be very good in anaerobic. They're not bad in aerobic exercise.
There's not a difference in the production of lactate, right?
There's not really, no, you're not going to see lactate with them, because the lactate is going to be a product of anaerobic metabolism. Right? So if you're maintaining aerobic metabolism, you should be good. These people will make lactate. On anaerobic exercise, they will make lactate, and that's a key buy. These people are going to make lactate. So we're going to look at some where when your diagnosis is going to be, I have this person exercise, they don't make any lactate. Don't make any lactate. Anaerobic exercise, they don't make any lactate. That'll be a key buy for them. Because if they're not making lactate, they're not getting glucose. What happens with these patients, and with several others in this, is that 5-10 minutes of aerobic exercise, these people kind of come around with a second wind, and two things are really responsible for that. One is that you've got the blood flow, and you're getting more nutrients to the blood, to the muscle to begin with. The second is that you're starting to increase the amount of fuel and lipid that's in the blood, and the muscle loves to use that. As long as it's aerobic, we're good to go. So it's taking advantage of a fuel supply and increased blood flow after a few minutes of aerobic exercise. So they do okay. They do have muscle weakness, but they do okay. Appreciate it. 4. I'm glad I told you you didn't have to memorize the numbers of the name. 4. Number 4, described in 1956, leads to early death, autosomal recessive, called Anderson's disease, and this was kind of the opposite. Anderson's disease. This is a deficiency of the brancher enzyme. So they call this one of the names that they've given this one is amylopectinosis. Amylopectinosis. Because you've got glycogen that looks like amylose. Doesn't have any branches on it. Very limited amount of branches and long chains. So it's a result of the brancher deficiency. So if we're busy making our glycogen, that brancher deficiency, we're going to end up with long alpha-1,4 glucose units and very limited number of branches on it. So it looks like amylose. Going to be some of the same symptoms you see, early onset. Within a month, there's going to be a failure to grow and a failure to stop to thrive in the interim. It's not going to do very well. Because of that very abnormal structure of the glycogen, these long chains in the liver, you're going to see liver scarring early on, so they're going to have a fibrosis, fibrotic liver, and that's going to turn to cirrhosis and ultimately liver failure. That cirrhosis is going to lead to high blood pressure as well. So they've got cirrhosis, high blood pressure, liver failure. It's really pretty rare to see this in the muscle. Pretty rare to see it in the muscle. It usually is a liver issue. Diagnosis in infants, look at the structure. You look at the structure of glycogen. So you do a liver biopsy, and look at the structure. And then, of course, there's also always sending blood in for genetic testing to see if if this individual is carrying the homozygous recessive set of genes, their genes. Treatment, there isn't any. There really is no treatment. You treat for symptoms. So you're going to end up treating for liver failure, liver problems, and you're going to end up treating for heart failure. These people are going to end up with a large heart, and heart failure tends to take them out. Usually, in these infants, they manage to pull it off for about 3 to 5 years. Death usually occurs by year 5 with this disease. No treatment. It's not a good outcome. So there's not a good outcome for this. 5. You guys tell me the answer. Here's type 5. Type 5, and here's how it's 1 in 100,000 again. It's an autosomal recessive. It's adult onset and child onset. You can have both. And it's a myophosphorylase deficiency. C. Glycogen phosphorylase. It's muscle phosphorylase deficiency. You look at the muscle and look at the glycogen. What do you expect to see in the glycogen? This would be typical for an exam question. What does glycogen look like? Is there any reason to be abnormal? You got brancher, you got debrancher enzyme, should be normal. What are you going to note? What's the notable thing about muscle glycogen in this deficiency? You can't break it down. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to have more. You're going to have elevated glycogen of normal structure in this individual. What happens when you exercise this individual? They don't do well. They don't exercise well. One of the exams for this put a blood pressure cuff on. Stop blood flow. So there's no blood flow in this, so we've made the muscle anaerobic. Give them a big ball to squeeze. They can squeeze it until they can't. Usually about a minute, minute and a half. Do a blood draw and look for lactate. What are you going to find? No, glycogen is in the cell. What are you going to find if you do a blood draw and look for lactate? They didn't go anywhere. Because you have a phosphorylase deficiency, you can't break down the glycogen, you can't get free glucose. You can't get free glucose, you got nothing for anaerobic, and that's why they only last about a minute to a minute under an ischemic condition. And there's your diagnosis. You got it made. This usually presents later in life. There's child onset, but usually it's going to end up, some parents going to come in with a child to see you, and the child isn't very active. It's not that they don't want to be. There's nothing wrong with that child. They want to be active, but they just can't keep up with everybody else. They're going to poop out quicker, and the reason is that they just don't have the ability to provide glucose to that muscle when it starts going anaerobic. And again, this is an interesting group that can come around. If they do aerobic exercise, you do some training and counseling. Get this person so that they do ease into it with some, whatever they're doing, make it aerobic, not anaerobic. You ease into that, whatever the activity is, as it becomes more active, the person becomes more active, they're going to give more blood flow. They're going to change some of those hormone signals we talked about, and we're going to see an increased loss of lipid material out of the adipose cell, and that's going to start supplying fuel to the muscle. And we'll see how that works. It's going to work the same way that the glycogen controls of work. We have gone through a graphic detail. Only it's going to be on the animals issue. So they tend to do all right. They get a second wind after about 10 minutes if you keep them in an anaerobic situation. The other thing you look at in the muscle biopsy is see how much phosphorylase activity is there. If there's no phosphorylase activity, you know you've got problems. So lack of phosphorylase, glycogen, normal structure, and lots of it. And then no lactate upon ischemic exercise, anaerobic exercise. Those are going to be key buys for you. Problems with these patients. Well, that extra glycogen in the muscle causes, and especially with exercise, anaerobic exercise, that causes muscle cells to start to break down. And so you're going to note that in the urine. They're going to have myoglobinuria. They're going to have myoglobin in the urine. That's going to upset the renal tissue, and a lot of times these people go into renal failure as a result. So it's really kind of important for the individual to be counseled on how to exercise, how to be active, and limit the loss of muscle tissue, muscle cells, because that's going to have the biggest negative consequence for these folks is going to be on the renal tissue. It's going to have an impact on renal tissue. Genetic testing, blood draw, that sort of thing. Glycogen storage disease type 6. Her's disease. Now, the lecture today is going to be less different than the lecture I was given 2 or 3 years ago. There's a whole bunch of glycogen storage that is lumped in with glycogen storage disease type 6. Type 9 now is considered type 6, and type 10 is now considered type 6. So type 6 is hepatic phosphorylase deficiency. All right. So now, opposite of muscle, where we know that the glycogen is there for providing the glucose units for anaerobic metabolism for the fibroblasts. Here we have a deficiency in hepatic phosphorylase, and that means we're going to have an inability to continually make blood glucose. So some of the symptoms are going to be similar to what we see in patients that have the type 1. Type 9 is phosphorylase B kinase deficiency. Well, you should be able to make immediate sense of that